Welcome back to the Unacceptable News. I'm your host, Justin Bush. Be careful out there. It's raining cats and dogs. Tonight's story is about Kelly Cahill and the Australia abduction case of 1993. So in 1993, Kelly Cahill, her husband, and multiple other persons witnessed a landed UFO off the side of the road, and they allegedly were abducted. So this story kind of breaks. It was August the 8th, 1993. They were in the Dandenong Mountains, so Dandenong in Australia. So they were going through this little mountain range. It's about 50 kilometers outside of Melbourne. So this is literally in Victoria. So it's in Victoria, Australia. Anyway, they're going home. On their way home, Kelly Cahill and her husband see a UFO above the trees. When they first spotted, Kelly described it as like a blimp. It looked like a egg shape or oval shape with lights around the rim. And she said you could clearly see the distinct outline of multiple humanoids behind the lights. So if you imagine when a cop gets out, flashes light at you, you can kind of see the silhouette, but you can't really make out who they were. So her husband and her slow down. This thing is a few hundred yards away from them. They see it. They get a really good look at it. As they're talking about it, it shoots off. She said it shot off to their left. As they went a little further down the road, they said they ran into what she called a wall of light. So it was like a big, bright light that just blinded them. And once they got into that wall of light, there was a turn that they were forced to go around. They were going down the road, and when they did, off to their, I believe, right-hand side, there was a craft landed in an open field. It was like some farmland. So they see this craft. Now this craft was reportedly about 30 feet tall, about 160 feet long, and it's on the ground. Now they pull over immediately when they see this thing. Most people would, in fact, whatever. People do. People see it, they stop immediately because they're like, what is that thing? And then something happens. I don't need to get into it. So they see this thing, they stop, and two other cars that were driving down the road, the same road as them, also stopped down the side of the road. Now, they said they got out of their car to look at this thing. Most people do. Once again, you see this thing and you're like, what is that? Like, it's just people just do it. And they make that mistake. If you want to know what it looks like, people are always like, well, weren't you scared? It's so dangerous. Watch a video of the people that go to the national parks, and there's like a bear and its cubs, and they get out, they get like 20 feet from it, they're taking pictures, and because it's amazing. They've never seen a grizzly bear before. And then they get attacked, and everybody's like, they're idiots. Everybody acts that way sometimes. You see something, you don't know what you're dealing with, and people just go for it. They're like, this is my only chance, right? So they get out of their car. These creatures come out, between 7 to 8 of them, about 6 to 7 foot tall. They were dark. They had no nose, mouth, or ears, just these large eyes, tall creatures. They split up, and some of the people that parked behind them kind of formed a little group looking at the object. They split up. They went over to those people. They came over to Kelly and her husband. Now, Kelly says that she was feeling, and some of the other people reported the same thing, a low humming vibration that you could physically feel in the body. She said that she was hit. She started screaming. She was panicking. She was hit with something that she referred to as maybe it felt like electric, and it knocked her backwards onto her back. She sat up. The wind was knocked out of her. She was terrified, and she completely lost vision in her eyes. Now, at this time, she says that she heard a voice coming from these creatures as they approached, and they were talking to her husband. So they said, "We mean you no harm." And her husband essentially said, why did you hurt Kelly, right? Now, Kelly was on the ground. She sat up. She was blinded. She was incredibly sick. In fact, she stated that she threw up immediately. She said she felt absolutely terrible. She didn't know what this situation was. She said that somebody came up at that point, she doesn't know who, and touched her shoulder. The next thing she knows, she's in the car, completely disoriented, doesn't remember what was going on, and her and her husband went home. There was about an hour and a half of missing time. So she said that in the weeks after, she started to remember. She noticed immediately she had a mark on her stomach. She noticed immediately she was getting extremely sick. There was a bunch of paranormal activity going around in her house at the time, like immediately after the situation. Her husband refused to talk about it. He would only admit the very next day, he would only admit to seeing the UFO flying, not the what transpired when it landed, but just the first time they saw it and it shot away. That's all he would admit to at first. So she, was very sick. She ended up having to go to the hospital. She bled from her privates for approximately 3 weeks. When she went to the hospital, they observed this burn on her navel. She is bleeding when she shouldn't be bleeding. They did a study on her. They realized that she had some sort of uterine infection, so a uterus infection. They put her on heavy antibiotics. She was in the hospital for some time, but she continued to have medical problems. She said she suffered from severe headaches, sensitivity to light, all sorts of different sorts of physical illnesses. She went in, she got MRIs of her head. They said they looked okay. They gave her pain meds for the MRI or for the migraines. She also claimed to have continual contact afterwards and all of these different strange electrical phenomena around her house. So after a few weeks, so she goes to the hospital, she gets very sick. She wants to come forward. Her husband does not. She does. She ends up contacting a UFO research group. This case became one of the most well-studied UFO contact encounters of, Australian history. And she eventually wrote a book called Encounters. It became a fairly well-selling book. She has 5 witnesses to these events, 3 cars. One had 1 person in it, one had 3 people in it, and one was her and her husband. So you had multiple eyewitnesses. One of them was a bank manager, his wife, a registered nurse, and then the final person was a man that worked for the government in a law office for the government. So he did not want to be known. But they all eventually came forward. And the way they came forward was simple. She reached out to investigators. Investigators came to her. She explained the situation. The husband clearly saw the UFO, even though he didn't want to talk about it and all this. They essentially said, well, she was so adamant that there were other people. Like, there were more cars there, right? You have to be able to find these cars. So they put out an ad in the paper, basically said, if anybody has seen anything weird in this area, contact us. What they didn't realize was not only were they going to get contacted by the other people that were involved in this abduction or contact situation, but they got contacted by dozens of people that had seen just the UFO. So in the region where this UFO was flying, they had multiple eyewitnesses, some of which were driving down that very road as Kelly Cahill on the same night. So other people witnessed part or all of this situation. So when the other, 4 witnesses came forward, the 2 women reported the exact same thing. They had burns on their stomachs. One of the men reported having burns and wounds as well. They reported additional phenomena, additional encounters with these creatures after the case. But Kelly Cahill and her husband had no idea that these people existed. Kelly Cahill took the researchers to the location of the landing. They put out the call to look for other people. They found these other people that came forward. They verified that they were all telling the same story. And the way they did that was not just by the wounds on their bodies and things like that. They had each of these groups independently take them to the scene where it happened. And they all found the location. They knew where this happened. So the researchers knew about the fact that there were multiple witnesses for years. They never told the witnesses about each other. They were trying to corroborate each other's story. The UFO group eventually reached out to the Monash University of Melbourne, and they sent their scientific team out, or they created a scientific team, sent it out and collected evidence at the landing site. they found a litany of strange things, including disruption to the magnetic field. They found chemicals. They found impressions. So they found some evidence that this happened, as well as their physical evidence left on some of these abductees. Two of the witnesses had ligature marks on their ankles from being strapped down, and one of those witnesses said they remembered it very specifically being strapped to a table after being taken. So you have multiple eyewitnesses, 3 different cars, none of them know each other. The researchers find out about this, they cross-reference all of their stories. They have them draw pictures, they cross-reference their medical analysis with the wounds that they had. They had some burns on the inside of their thighs that were recorded. They go out, they test this facility, this landing spot. They find all this evidence to corroborate Kelly Cahill and her husband's story. And eventually, some of the witnesses go out and do interviews. They talk about it, but they said that the publicity was so much that they just didn't want to do it anymore. So they came out and did a few interviews, and then they just disappeared. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. It was too much for them. 2 of the men had written statements to the investigators, and so the investigators knew who they were, and some of those people had their names leaked. So eventually this culminated into a lawsuit where some of the witnesses that had their information leaked by the UFO group sued the UFO group. Because when they came forward, they never wanted their identities to be revealed because of their jobs, working at a bank, working for the government. So there was this lawsuit that kind of entrenched the case for a while. But eventually Kelly Cahill wrote a book, and she became a best-selling author. The book sold really well in Australia especially. And she said that after this all happened, she had continued encounters. So multiple encounters over the first 5 months after this happened. She said that she was getting electric shocks all the time. Things that shouldn't shock you, like the ground or trees or rocks. She said there was all sorts of electrical phenomena in her house. So cars turning on by themselves, lights turning on and off by themselves, light bulbs blowing, things like that. She also said that it deteriorated her marriage. Her and her husband divorced. He did not want her to come forward. He never wanted to talk about it. He wanted to pretend like it never happened. And they ended up divorcing and separating. And apparently because of this stress of the situation. Now her husband, after the divorce and separation, her husband did admit that he remembers what happened, but he just didn't want to talk about it. So eventually he admitted, yeah, I know what happened in the field. But he was a devout religious person. He said that he told his wife that this had been happening to him his whole life, and that he just wanted to put it behind him because of his religion. He believed that this was all demonic, that it was evil. His religion wouldn't allow him to accept that there might be some sort of higher life form. A lot of religions are predicated on the fact that humans are God's favorite. We're God's favorite. You, me. Lots of religions believe this. We're the chosen people of God, right? God loves us. That's why he gave us this planet and chose us and things like that. So when confronted with a higher form of life, a more advanced form of life, a non-human form of life, many religious people choose to treat it as a demon, demonic, evil, because it challenges their belief in their own religion, which a lot of times they were raised to believe since they were small children. So it really collapses your ability to kind of comprehend what's going on. Now, later on, Kelly Cahill came out and said, I don't think that was the first encounter I've had. Back in 1991, when I was pregnant, I woke up with my water broken. I was spread eagle on top of the covers on the bed, laying face down, which if you're pregnant, you understand, like, you're not laying face down for any reason. She said, when I got up, realized my water was broken, she said, my nightgown was on, and it was on inside out. And she said, and I knew something happened. She said, I don't even remember changing into my nightgown. She said, I was watching TV, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up in bed with my nightgown on inside out. And she said, but because I was in labor, I just had to put it behind me. And she said, after the later on events, it made much more sense. She believed something happened that night. I'm going to show you some clips from this case.
Something that looked like at first like a blimp, but as we drove closer to it, it looked like a circle of round orange lights. Except in those lights, there appeared to be figures standing in the shadows.
Inside,
yeah, behind the orange lights, you could see silhouettes of tall, dark figures. And I had enough time to say to my husband, look at the people in the windows, when it shot off to the left of us, and in a couple of seconds it was totally gone. But that was only the start of it, because we continued driving down the road, and about 2 kilometres later we ran into what I guess you could call a wall or a screen of light. It seemed that way to me anyway. I actually had to put my hand up to my brow in order to look through the window at the windscreen, and I still couldn't see a thing. From there on, we actually rounded a corner, and what was sitting in the field on the side of the road was a huge craft, probably the size of a 2 to 3 story building and the length of an Olympic swimming pool. So it wasn't something that was really easy to miss, and we pulled the car over, but we weren't the only people that did. 100 metres behind us, a bank manager, his wife and their friend, who's a registered nurse, pulled over, and another 25 to 35 metres behind them, David, a government law department employee, on his way home, actually pulled over as well.
Now, you weren't travelling on the road with these people. You just noticed when you got out.
No, didn't know these people at all. A low-level frequency coming in waves through my body, yet it was actually so dense that I could physically feel it. And it literally terrified the living daylights out of me. I mean, when I got out of the car, I was exhilarated, you know. I wasn't frightened when I got out of the car. All I could think is, this is absolutely amazing, and we're seeing something that most people wouldn't get the chance to see in a million lifetimes. And all of a sudden, that euphoria changed to absolute horror. And I really, I guess, lost the plot. I really lost control. I was so freaked out, I started screaming, and...
Was this physically uncomfortable to feel that wave coming through you?
Yes, it was almost like something was interfering with the way that my mind worked. It was like I couldn't think straight. It was like I was fighting to be able to think properly at all, and all I could feel was this raw emotional terror. It really was like a living nightmare. And
oh goodness.
Then these beings or figures came across the field. They split up, and at the same time as I was yelling out, their eyes appeared to light up a bright red colour. I don't know whether that's infrared or what it was.
Case, I mean, the amount of evidence you have between the landing marks and all the things that happened to the soil. I know that I have a little list here, if you don't mind, just to summarize things for people.
That's fine.
The evidence that you have. Let me get the soil effects here. There's 6 soil effects that I got now. What I'm reading off of now, just so people know, is off of an article that you wrote that is on the internet through the, let me just double check, MUFON LA website, because you were just down there doing a presentation for them as well, along with a lot of other places. Kentucky, Canada, Northern and Southern California. And the 6 soil effects. Now, you had mentioned that there was it tannic acid? Is that the
Tannic acid is probably the strange one, because it was it should have been dissolved with all the rain. It was actually coated in an unidentifiable waxy substance, which seems to be a residue left from...
Yeah, what's the waxy substance? That's incredible. Is it plant material or wax? I mean,
it was...
What a strange...
I couldn't really identify it, except that it was... You know, it was waxy. As I said, it seemed to be a residue left, and it was only in this crescent-shaped magnetic anomaly. In fact, all of the soil changes and changes in the chemistry were confined to that crescent-shaped magnetic anomaly and the ground within that.
So out of the entire large area that they tested, most of the...
Everything was inside of that, yeah.
Now, there also... How was the foliage of the area?
That's very interesting, actually. All of the foliage in the crescent area, including blades of grass, leaves, everything, was covered in what looked like little holes everywhere. It's like a constant abrasion through everything. And this little hole effect seems to go further, because it was actually in the soil as well. the soil seemed to be filled with little air holes, as if water had been drained from it very, very rapidly, like some kind of...
rapid dehydration.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a little bit similar to what happens in some crop circles. That's very interesting. They've had that happening, the hardening of the soil,
yeah,
the rapid...
the compacting, exactly.
Yeah, so the compacting from the pressure, the minute air holes. Also, there was a great deal of sulfur present in that crystal.
Yeah, an extraordinary amount, actually, in the semicircle. Sort of... But after my experience, all I could think of was a fire and brimstone circle. The sulfur comes in really well there, doesn't it?
I wonder if that's where that original association came from. You know, that's very possible. Very interesting. Now, the and the other cross-reference that we have between you and the other 2 carloads of witnesses, a total of 6 people from 3 different vantage points. Well, the 6 of you were along the road. What you all share together is, as we saw earlier in the show, the drawings of the crafts that were all drawn separately, yet clearly, you know, you all saw the same thing, the drawings of the beings. You and some of the other women had similar medical problems after. Did any of them experience the migraines like you did, or any unusual electrical effects around their homes?
I am not sure of the... Actually, you're now asking me questions that I should have been asking myself. Thank you. Now I know what to ask for.
Call that research when you get home.
I have been, you know, I am aware that they've had some kind of visitations afterwards.
Oh, they did?
Too. Yeah, the ladies did. As for electrical phenomena, I don't know. Bill did seem to have, that was the male from the second party, did seem to have one unusual factor with his experience, is that directly afterwards he started losing quite large clumps of hair from out the back of his head, and within a very short amount of time he developed quite a large bald spot. So there seems to, I don't know whether it's effects of radiation or what it was, but...
Now, did you have any reaction as if you were exposed to radiation or anything like that?
Well, this is what makes me keep thinking back to the Laylaw, the incident that might have occurred 2 years before, was that I got very, very ill after that, and I started losing hair by the handful.
This was right after the birth of your son, after the event where you woke up.
And I actually had to...
oh dear.
I actually had to be rushed to hospital with what was supposed to be appendicitis, and they did an emergency operation on me at 1 o'clock in the morning. But first they did a blood test, and one of the signs of appendicitis is that your white cell count goes sky high.
Right.
And yet when they got inside, all they could find was some sort of inflammation, and there wasn't anything wrong with the appendix, just the whole inside of me had become inflamed. And what I find is unusual is that radiation has the same effect, that it sends the white cell count soaring, and you know, sort of all happened around the same period, and it really makes me think that
that you might have had some radiation exposure on the event that occurred before the August '93 event that you talk about in this book.
So really the question is this woman telling the truth? Is her husband telling the truth? Are the other people that didn't know each other telling the truth? It seems that at minimum something happened. All of the physical evidence, whether it be the medical evidence or whether it be the soil sample or chemical analysis evidence, it all shows that something transpired that night. So the real question is, do you believe this was a real UFO abduction, or do you think that this is some sort of hoax or government psyop? And that's the news. If you'd like to support our channel, go to the description or in the pinned comment down below. That's the unacceptable news. Don't like, don't subscribe, just run.